Pallof isometric hold with lower trunk rotation. So we really like this drill to use to teach dissociation from our lower extremity, from our upper extremity. And what we're doing is we're actually driving the motion from the bottom toward the upper extremity. So a lot of times if we do lower trunk rotations and people throw their arms out to the side, they'll really drive their arms into the ground, which creates a ton of recruitment in their upper back and into like their lats or anything that creates humeral extension. And that kind of locks up the thoracic spine. So when they go through that lower trunk rotation, they don't really get a lot of trunk rotation. It's kind of coming through the hips, and then they're limited because of the mobility of going into internal and external rotation of their hip. So when we add this Pallof hold by pressing up, it actually gets our pecs to fire a little bit more and drives us more into this horizontal abduction, or maybe like a little bit of a flex position. So that way we're not recruiting a bunch of muscles that cross on the back half of our body, which will free up our ability to move through our lower trunk. It's a really simple drill. In this video, we have a pretty heavy bench set up. We have like a longer loop resistance band. You don't have to use a resistance band. You can use a cable stack as well. I just like to do something that gives you somewhat of a resistance because it actually helps drive back out of that rotation position. So when you get set up, what we're doing is you got to kind of play with how much resistance you need, or another way to think about it is how much assistance that you need. So if I want, there's like a fine line. If I get too far, there's gonna be a ton of resistance and it's gonna kind of pull my body back. I wanna get into a position to where I can get enough tension on this band to where I have somewhat of a leverage point to pull my legs back up. So that's the other thing is the setup. When we do this, we're only rotating in one direction. So if the band is anchored to my left, I'm gonna rotate to my right, and then I'll switch a 180 and have the band anchored to my right, and I'll rotate to my left, so that way we're hitting both sides. So again, kind of start down low, push your low back into the ground, hands to the ceiling, and then what we're doing is we're trying to keep our knees bent to 90. This is gonna be the easiest position to start in, and then I'm trying to keep my shoulder blades on the ground, and I'm trying to let everything else rotate from literally my tailbone all the way up to my upper back, and then I'm gonna rotate back out of that and come back to the starting position. And then relative to your hip mobility, this can kind of change your setup, right? If you're somebody who has a hard time training into internal rotation, you're gonna get internal rotation on this top leg, which is another reason why we like it. So maybe you're somebody that needs to put a yoga block between your knees the long way and keep your feet together. So that way when you rotate over, you're not creating a ton of internal rotation, and that can help reduce some of the irritability that you feel in the actual hip joint itself. The whole goal of this movement is not to drive movement into just the hip, not just the back. We're trying to create rotation from the back all the way down through the limbs. So again, on my back, letting my legs rotate out to the side, and then I'm gonna come back out of that. If I'm trying to increase the rotation at my hip a little bit, I can just think about keeping my knees together as I do that. And then if I want to increase the lever arm or make it a little bit more difficult on my midsection, I can start to lengthen my legs, right? By starting to straighten my legs out, it makes them a lot heavier. So when I go to come back out of that, I need more resistance on the band. I can't get back out of that position, so then I have to scoot out a little bit. So typically what we're going to ask of you is to start with a resistance band, so that way you can get some sort of leverage to pull yourself back. Start in a modified range of motion before you're trying to come all the way down to getting your knees on the ground and back out of that. And then also being able to control your breathing. A lot of times people will bear down. When they bear down, they're getting recruitment from all those abdominal muscles, which kind of mimics driving the shoulders into the ground, and it will resist or counteract the rotation. Breathe through the motion. Try to use the band here as a little bit of a counterbalance, and you're moving as much as you can. Again, if you get cranky hips doing that, play with your hip positioning by using a yoga block and keeping your feet together, so that way your hip is kind of biased in that externally rotated position and it won't create as much irritability in the front of the hip.